Sihiye Mishakeila. We're learning the Maamar about these two verses from Parshas Mishpatim of Sihiye Mishakeila Bakar Batzachas Misbar Yamachem Male. You know, bereaved or barren women in your land, I'll fill the number of your days, which follows the verse of Vavatem Asavai Lokechem, to serve Havaya, serve God. Verachas Lachmacha Vespemecha, and He will bless your bread and your water. Vasirasu Machal Mekirbecha, I will remove illness from your midst. And we're trying to figure out, is this a command or a promise? These are the three basic blessings of physical living: having sustenance, and not just sustenance, but sustenance in abundance; having life, not just life, but healthy, long life; and children, not just children, but healthy, thriving, long-living children. These are obviously things that should come true for all of us. Amen, so may it be. So basically we're trying to figure out command or promise, how is this coming to fruition? Essentially the promise follows the command a little bit, so serve God as you're supposed to, and then these blessings should come to fulfillment. But we have to figure out, first of all, we went through the whole thing, mazel, how much of it do we actually control, how much of it do we actually impact? So to a certain extent, some of it's been pre-decided, but at the same time, a Jew has no mazel, so we could change it. And then we started looking at the idea of divine service. What does it mean to serve God? God doesn't need anything. A master has a servant because he needs something from the servant. God doesn't need anything. What are we doing trying to serve God? What's going on here? Are we just doing busy work? Did God just put us here and give us a couple of rules just to keep us entertained? Does our service actually have an impact? The unofficial first section of the Maamar goes into whether or not we have an impact. Do our mitzvahs have an impact? Some say yes, some say no. The initial conclusion we get to is up to the highest levels of creation, so even the highest of spiritual worlds, which are still a creation, up through there and the source of all that, we have an impact. Higher than that, we don't have an impact. That seems to be conclusion enough. How do we reconcile the two opinions? Then we say, actually, go back to the verse. The verse says, I will remove illness. Who's the I? I is essence of God. Essence is essence. Essence cannot be diluted. Essence cannot be divided. Essence is just wholesomeness, purity, simplicity, etc. Essence is essence. It's inexplicable. It's just isness. Everybody has a core I to them. And here we're talking about God, which is totally beyond human understanding. So first we said we don't impact at that level. And now we're saying, but wait a second. So what's I doing in the middle of this verse? Why would essence insert himself into the verse? So ultimately we have to redefine our conclusion. We have to refigure our conclusion. And we say that at some measure we do actually affect the level of essence. It doesn't necessarily make sense about why we would, but God chose it to be so. And so that's what it is. Now, what does it mean that we impact at the level of essence? Because tracing creation all the way back to its ultimate source, we're going to go all the way back up to essence. And essence cares about what the outcome of creation should be. Essence cares about that the intent of creation should be fulfilled. The intent of creation to refine man in creation. So our job to make a home for God down in this world has to be done by essence's own choice. Essence cares that that should come to be. All the other details about how that comes to be, Torah, mitzvahs, and living in this world, that's more for the other dimensions of God. That's more where their relationship is. We end up reconciling and reframe the conclusion, or reconcile it again. Ultimately, what we're saying is that our divine service does make a difference. God chose that it should be so, and so it is. And when our divine service is at the way that it's supposed to be, then we're drawing down incredible blessings that essence is coming to bless, which is a much higher level than the other dimensions could bless that. Once we figure that out, we have to say, okay, now that we know that divine service makes a difference, what is divine service? What does it look like? And that brought us to divine service begins with servant to master relationship, submission, putting yourself aside, all the things that make you you are put aside in service to the master. We need you here to get a job done. The fact that you might be struggling with it, the fact that you might not be totally aligned and I don't really like this mitzvah or whatever, fine, but right now we got to get a job done. So get the stuff done, and then all that other stuff you can figure out as you go. The whole fear-based thing, we see that in the structure of our prayers, in the structure of davening. We start with Moda Ani, remember Moda Menachem Lach, it's thanks, but it's also acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is something that there's a separation involved, because I'm not taking it in. I acknowledge that you're correct, even though I don't fully understand why you're correct. Remember that we saw the sages said that Rebbe Meir is correct, even though they couldn't fully understand it. So acknowledgement means I'm not necessarily taking it in. I know that you're correct. We say this about God to God. We know that your reality is the correct reality, even though we can't fully comprehend it. We can't fully take it in. In the sequence of davening, we start off with that submission. We start off with the hodu. We start off with saying we acknowledge your correctness. We talk about God being the allness of everything. Then from there we go to love. That's Shema. Shema is love the Lord your God. Then after Shema we have the Amidah bracha, 19 blessings that we say, and each blessing is a drawing down of divine light. That's what we saw, that what's the origin of the word bracha? It's like brecha, a pool where water collects, or like bringing an animal down to its knees, or bending the vine back into the earth. Because the whole idea of bracha is actually drawing down, so it's specifically not the separation. So how do we get from fear to the drawing down? Love is the connector, which is why fear is the starting point, but it's not the end game. When we're talking about divine service, fear gets us in line, gets our behavior correct, and then we have to go from there, we go to love of God. And love of God is going to lead to the drawing down this. And we see that also when we talk about service of God. We have the parallels of different verses about serve God and serve God with all your heart. So putting those together, what is service of the heart? Service of the heart is prayer. Because it begins in the heart and it focuses on changing the heart. What do we mean by that is because A, we have the emotive state that we're supposed to be recognizing in prayer, feeling love and fear of God. And also because when we're talking about affecting the heart, we're talking about taking all of our worldly oriented passions, all our materialistic pleasures, the drive that we have for materiality and for the physical world, and we're trying to redirect it all toward godly purposes. So when we daven correctly, especially daven that's coming from love, which is the most correct form of davening, as in I actively feel love for God as I'm praying, which is something that we work on. It's not something you just get overnight. It's something that's a process. Part of that comes from learning about God, thinking about God, all the things that we always speak about. When I feel that love of God, I'm just going to achieve two things. One, my godly soul is going to fully align with its source. And then through that, it's also going to then be able to act upon the animal soul to say, take all your drives and passions and abilities and turn that toward godly purposes. One of the biggest things of the Chassidic movement that the Baal Shem Tov brought in is that we're not here to break physicality. We're not here to break the animal soul. What we want to do is take all those energies and channel them. That's the whole thing about the ox to the yoke. You have a tremendous power. You have tremendous strength. We just have to yoke it correctly. We have to direct it correctly. There's other sects, other movements that are much more about breaking physicality, breaking desire, breaking all that kind of stuff. So yes, there are times with certain habits or whatever you could say, certain things have to be broken. But for the most part, anything that has a potential for good, we want to redirect it, we want to rechannel it. Because it's not for naught that we have it. The differences between the two souls, the divine soul, which is usually intellect over emotion, it's more in control because of its godly orientation. The animal soul is kind of a toss-up if the mind or the heart is going to rule. But that means that the animal soul has tremendous passions. They're not for naught. Tremendous passion can drive you in most incredible ways. So we want to take that and we want to channel it correctly. And the process of that can be achieved through correct davening. So you kind of need both. On the one end, study and meditation, etc., learning about God will lead you to the love and fear that you need for davening. And then when you're going to do that davening with the love and fear, do that correctly, that's also going to then have a ripple effect outside of that. Through doing that, we'll be able to fulfill our purpose here in this world, which is part of why this whole process, even though we're describing it very simply, it's a rigorous process. That's why the word of avoda, of service, comes from tanning hides. Ibur tanning hides. There's many processes involved, rigorous, breaking the sweat kind of process to make it happen. So that closes out the unofficial second section of the Maamar. 1, does our service have an impact? 2, what does service actually look like? Third unofficial section, is how did the original verses relate to what we're talking about now? Going back even to the idea of command or promise, what can you command, promise in these verses? So that's now going to bring us to what are the spiritual counterparts of the things that we spoke about. That's the section that we're in the middle of. We started some of it because what we did is we had to say what is, looking at these terminologies of Sihiye Mishakeila, there should not be a bereaved or barren woman in your land. What is that supposed to mean? Physically, nobody wants that. Not really by choice at all. But in spiritual terminologies, this is something that's in our control. How is that? Because of Akara Mishakeila, they're terminologies for spiritual states of being. The Akara, what is Akara? It's a barren woman, God forbid. Either because A, they literally don't have the anatomical faculties to do so. We saw the example of the foremothers, Sarah and Rivka. Sarah and Rebecca, they literally didn't have a womb. God crafted a womb for them when they were finally going to have kids. And for some people, they can't figure it out because nothing's missing. There's no reason why it shouldn't happen. In spiritual terminologies that we do have control over this, someone who's an Akara, someone who's God forbid barren, as in, they're not being a receiver. So what do we mean by that? We have to look at what are parent and children in this way, and that's intellect is supposed to give birth to emotions. That we saw from Tanya, we learned all the way back that thinking about God, meditating about God, contemplating God, etc. are supposed to elicit an emotive response. That's considered parent and children because one gives birth to the other. In Akara, that's someone who that process is not happening for them. Why isn't that process happening for them? Because either they might be what we call too full of a vessel. Man has a fill capacity. There's a fill line for man. Unlike God, who's just infinite and just keep putting and there's no end to it, we can only fill up so much. So a person, in this regard, is someone who's so full of their own self-concerns, even good self-concerns, even worried about their spiritual state, but because they're so focused on the self, they are not able to take something in, which would lead to a result of someone being an Akara in spiritual terminologies. The process of contemplation to lead to a motive state is not going to work, which we saw last time in Tanya, that it's all about, remember, the log that doesn't light has to be broken. Because a person filled themselves up, the only way they're going to be able to solve this process is to somehow unfill themselves, to remove themselves from their self-concerns, even the good self-concerns. Frankly, right now in service, it's not about you. Remember, the servant puts himself aside to serve the master. This is part of our life journey. This is part of the life process. No, but I'm worried about how much Torah I learned. We don't have time for figuring that stuff out. We got Torah mitzvahs to do. We're not checking the growth chart right now. So that's one kind of Akara. The other kind of Akara, that's what we're up to now, to learn about what the other kind of Akara is. But before we go to that, just to mention, we did look at it briefly. What is a Mishakeila? Mishakeila is someone who can have children, but bereaved is, God forbid, either a miscarriage or, God forbid, someone who buries their young. So what does it mean, a command? Because in spiritual terminologies, someone who is considered a Mishakeila is someone who goes through the intellectual process. The parent, that's the intellectual process, does give birth to an emotion, but that emotion doesn't last. It's not enduring. Going back also, we talk about physical brachas. It's not just to say that someone should be blessed with children, but you want healthy, thriving children. You want longevity. In this regard, you went through the spiritual process of intellect leading to a motive state, but it didn't endure. In that, someone's going to be considered a Mishakeila. So the second Akara, the first Akara we said is someone who can't receive, as in they don't have the capacity to be a receiver. So the process isn't going to play out, the intellectual process leading to the motive state, because they're too full of a vessel they can't take in. The second kind of Akara, this is the new stuff now, in physical terms, is someone who has a womb but doesn't have children, could, in theory, conceive, but they're not. The short answer to that is because there's 3 partners in creation. This is proof of it, because there's no reason why the person shouldn't have kids, and the only answer for that is the God factor. In this case, it's not the full vessel. The mind has the capacity to know and become intellectually excited. There's not something necessarily wrong in the process, as in that the process can happen. Here the process can happen in spiritual terms, yet no emotions are born and revealed in the heart. You have the parent, the intellectual process works, and yet the children aren't being born. And we say that the mind is becoming excited. It's not just a coldness, we are in the process of trying to have the emotive state, which is the children, but for whatever reason, the heart is not feeling it. So in this regard, conception is possible, yet no children are born. Gestation should occur, but is not sustained. There's a link missing there. And where would that link come in? From Tehillim, a light is sown for the righteous and for the upright of heart joy. Looking at the idea of a light being sown. Creation of a child is the closest physical example of creation, yesh me'ayim, something from nothing. That's the highest level of creation that man can achieve, and that puts us the closest to God, to being like a godlike state in the fact that we have created a life. However, conception requires zriya, the sowingness, assisted by the revelation of the power of Ein Sof, as seen from the fact that there can be no natural reason for a couple to not conceive. Third partner in creation. You can have mother and father, but without the God factor, it's not going to result in conception. It's not going to result in an actual child being created. So it is in the spiritual for giving birth to emotions. The divine creative power shows when a tiny lifeless seed grows into a beautiful, fruitful tree. Man plants, Hashem causes to grow. Through Torah mitzvahs, seeds are planted in this world, and the divine light is channeled through fulfillment of Hashem's will. As growth of seeds comes through a higher power, for man this is Hazaza Atzmis, which is quintessential tremor to the core of being, transcending human logic and reason at the start of a new phase of divine service at least once a year. So what are we looking at here? What do you mean by Akara? Parshas Bereshis. We've actually saw this before in the Tshuva Maamar. God gave the earth the power of growth. Tatchei ha'aretz, let the earth sprout forth with all the kind of vegetations, etc. God gave the earth the power of growth. So when you put a seed in the ground, that seed disintegrates and it grows into something. It's because we're stimulating the power of growth in the earth. It's not that the seed has the power of growth. The earth does. And the seed is what wakens up that power for something to grow from there. So we have an idea. There has to be a planting. There has to be the sowing of something for growth to occur. When we're looking here about someone, all the capacities are there, but something's not happening. In the spiritual terminologies, we're saying you got to make sure that the sowing is correct. And here we're seeing it in terms of Torah mitzvos. We're seeing in a sense of there being a core movement, something that reaches all the way to the core of someone's being. It's almost like a yearly assessment where you feel something to the core of yourself. Quintessential tremor, as they're calling it. So when the sowing is correct, as in the light is sowed for the righteous, etc., when all that is correct, that is when we can have God's blessing for growth to come in. The divine light that gets drawn down through that. It's not just enough to have the intellectual capacities, but to actually follow through with them. So those would be the 2 kinds of akar. Once we have the point where actually conception could occur, as in a person goes through the correct intellectual process, it's going to give birth to an emotive sense. So your mind is getting excited about what you're thinking about to the point that it's going to create emotions, going to wake up the passions and put them in the right kind of way. That person is now out of the akara stage. However, there's still the risk of, God forbid, of the Mishakelia stage. It's like if you go for a Shabbaton weekend somewhere and you're so inspired, everything's so great, you come back, you're ready to take on the whole world, but then what happens a few weeks later? You still feel that kind of energy. Is that still coursing through you? You go on a trip to Israel or something. You have such an energy going through you, but does it sustain? Now that we can actually get to the level, we have to make sure that it's going to be a sustainable level. We have to make sure that the process that we've gone through is not just flash in the pan, that's going to be something that's going to endure. And that is a command that we have to achieve. Once love and fear are born and revealed in the heart, which would be the opposite of akara, because now I actually feel. So that means not akara, the parent, the intellect is giving birth to emotions. Care must be taken to nurture them so they thrive, which would be the opposite of Mishakelia. So it's not enough to just say, oh, I'm doing everything correctly. No. You got to be excited about stuff. Love and fear of God has to be real to you. Specifically then is divine service genuine and true, as truth is ongoing and unchanging. So how do we know that you've reached a level is not just, oh, I've had a moment of love of God, I had a moment of fear of God, but these are sustainable. And when it's sustainable, now you know that you've reached true divine service. Which is also why you can see that this is all part of a process. It's not something that just happens overnight. That's why you see a pasuk, the verse from Mishlei, Svas emes tikon ad, vad argia l'shon shaker. The language of truth should be established forever, or the lip of truth should be established forever. But the tongue of falsehood is only momentary. Things that aren't true are things that don't last, and truth is forever. Emes, truth, infinity, God, Torah, all true, all forever, unchanging. Okay, Tanya, it's going to be about truth and endurance. Now this aforementioned love attained by Bainim at the time of prayer, by virtue of the temporary strengthening of the divine soul, of the animal soul, etc., but compared to the standard of tzaddikim, who serve God in perfect truth, in the truest manner of truth, this love is not called true service at all, since it passes and disappears after prayer, whereas it is written, the language, literally the lip of truth, should be established forever, but the tongue of falsehood is only momentary. That's what we just saw the verse, thus, truth refers to something immutable. The temporary and passing are not considered true. The same applies here. Since the Baini's love of God is felt only during prayer and disappears after, it does not measure up to the truest sense of truth, the perfect truth attained by tzaddikim. The Alter Rebbe is actually going to bring us something very interesting here in Tanya. For someone Bainani or lower, let's say you have a beautiful davening, that you actually achieve love of God in that davening. You say Shema and you really feel it. What happens if after you have the rest of the day, and does that sustain? Maybe yes, maybe no. Even here, we're talking about Akar Mishakeila, like maybe yes, maybe no. We say true service is if it endures. But if it didn't endure, is that not worth anything? Okay, yay, better luck next time. What are we doing with that? So on the one hand, we say if a person's compared to a tzaddik, the tzaddik always has it, so no, it's not necessarily true because the tzaddik keeps it. The love and the fear endure. So for anybody else that kind of waxes and wanes, it's not considered necessarily true. However, there is also a measure of truth that is correct for your level that you're at. So sure, compared to tzaddik, you're not necessarily at the level of truth. However, for your own self, of where you are, there is a level of truth that is true for that. Good example, not any of this my truth garbage stuff, but for example, if a kindergartner is reading a Go Dog Go kind of book, then you say, yay, you know how to read. But if a college student is reading that, then no, that's not considered reading for you. We're not changing truth. Truth is still truth. But we are considering there is a measure of truth that is true for the level that you're at. Nevertheless, in relation to the rank of the Beinoni, this love is regarded as a truly perfect service in terms of the level of truth. In each man relative to his standing in the category of the Beinoni, which is subdivided to many levels. So compared to a tzaddik, not necessarily true. But for you, where you are right now, this is true for you. Their love too, which they possess only during prayer, I term the language of truth, which shall be established forever. So it's massive what the Alter Rebbe is telling us. I.e., their love is true and permanent, though manifest only during prayer, since the divine soul has the power to awaken this love constantly, whenever it gathers strength during prayer, day after day, by means of the spiritual preparation appropriate to each soul's quality and rank. So because this Beinoni can tap into this consistently during prayer, maybe it doesn't last throughout the day, but it consistently happens during prayer because you could call upon this, then it's considered true for you at your level. The higher the level of the soul, the less preparation it requires to awaken its love of God. Regardless, every soul has the capacity to awaken its love of God during prayer. So specifically during prayer, we can tap into a love of God. Because that is a consistent ability for us, this is still true. Because that is a measure of endurance. Because there's consistency to it. Our job is to do it consistently. The Beinoni's love of God is thus constant, since it is either in an active revealed state or in potentia, and can be revealed at any moment throughout the day. Every Beinoni has the potential to attain the level of praying the whole day long. As in, every Beinoni, this is definitely for Beinoni, us we're not necessarily on that level, but even in our own measure, we have an ability to tap into something that for our level is a true level. Yet how is it possible for the same level of service to be considered untrue for the tzaddikim and true for Beinonim? Is truth not absolute? The quality of truth is to be found at every level. So truth is defined as that which agrees with the essence and core of the particular level where it is measured. Things are true if they agree with the essence of their own level, and untrue if they do not. They need not agree with a higher level to be considered true. So you see, we're still looking at objective truth. The difference is that objective truth, sometimes, for your level, that might not look like what it looks like for somebody in somebody else's level. Again, going back to the kid. Or think about somebody saying a bracha. If someone grew up learning how to say the brachot, they should be able to say bracha very clearly and beautifully and know what they're saying. Somebody who didn't grow up necessarily learning, and they only learned later on, the fact that they might bungle the bracha a little bit, mispronounce a word, that doesn't mean, oh no, you don't know how to say a bracha. For them, yay, you know how to say a bracha. Now, there's a level they have to keep working on it, they can get better at it, but for where you are right now, as a beginner and saying brachot, you have done a very good job. So you can have a kid in the sense of age and a kid in the sense of the level that they're at in spirituality. We haven't modified the truth. We're just recognizing that there is an objective truth according to the measure where a person's at. And it is objective. Truth is the attribute of Yaakov. Remember, we have Avram as kindness, Yitzchak is strength, Gevura, Chesed Gevura, and Yaakov is Tiferes. The perfect harmony of two opposing things is considered beauty, and that's truth. Truth is the attribute of Yaakov. As the verse states, you give truth to Yaakov, who is called the middle bolt, which secures everything from end to end. This is the verse that's being brought in from when it talks about building the Mishkan in the desert, the tabernacle, that you had the walls, they were in sockets, and they had connectors, and there was a bolt that ran all the way through. Here, the Alter Rebbe is using that terminology to say that truth is also a horizontal. It's not just a vertical, it's also horizontal. And it runs all the way through. So you see, it's still an objective measure of truth that goes all the way through. This level, the level of all the people at this level, there is a bolt of truth. If you're looking at it vertically as it compared to tzaddik, that's going to look different. But horizontal, there's a level of truth. Who is called the middle bolt, which secures everything from end to end, just as the middle bolt in the Mishkan secured and bolted all the boards together by passing through them all. In spiritual terms, the attribute of truth passes from the highest gradations and levels to the end, i.e. the lowest of all grades. In each gradation and level, it passes through the central point of that particular level, which is ed, which then becomes the point and quality, i.e. the standard of that level's attribute of truth. The attribute of truth is an unbounded inheritance. It has no upper limit as it extends to the highest levels, and all lower gradations and levels are as nothing compared with those superior to them. As is known to the students of the Kabbalah, the quality that is the head and intellect, as in the highest level, within lower grades, is inferior to the souls and feet, the very lowest level within the higher grades, as our sages say. The feet of the Chayot surpass all those levels lower than them, including the highest degree within those lower levels. So here it's a reference to the angels. The highest level of the low level cannot compare to the lowest level of the high level. That's when we're talking in terms of vertical truth. But here, the Alter Rebbe brought in this whole new thing about horizontal truth. The attribute of truth, then, is measured according to the standards of each level. Thus, the divine service of Beinim is considered true service relative to their level. Although, when compared with the service of Tzaddikim, it is not considered true since it passes after prayer. So this we have the whole thing about Beinim and Tzaddikim, etc. from Tanya. It's being brought here when it talks about the Mishakeila, because it's talking about having enduring truth, etc. So each of us at our own level, trying to figure out getting love and fear to endure it and things like that, each stage and each level has its measure of truth to it. So if we can achieve it davening time, then we're at one measure. And if you can keep it going beyond that, then you're at the next level until you could really get it to the ultimate obviously of endurance of it. But that's how you can see that service, remember, tending the highs, many processes involved, very many rigorous processes involved, because as soon as you hit one level, there's so many other levels to reach after that. But it's not to be disparaging or discouraging about the fact that as you're working through this, if you might stumble and trip a little bit along the way, we're going to be okay, because the fact that we could go again, the fact that we could tap into it again, shows that there's a measure of truth in what we're doing. That wraps up actually the two spiritual levels of Akara.